Star Trek The Original Series episode, The Corbomite Maneuver. This iconic episode is from Season 1. It is episode 10 and premiered on November 9th, 1966. This episode would mark the first appearance of DeForest Kelley, Nichelle Nichols, and Grace Lee Whitney. Special guest stars would include Clint Howard, who played Commander Baylock. He was the commander of the Thesaurus, which was the first Federation flagship. And Ted Cassidy will play the voice of Commander Baylock. For the more intimidating version of the character, Ted Cassidy would return to guest star again in Star Trek as Rock, an android in What a Little Girl's Made Of. Clint Howard has said in an interview that he had just turned 7 years old when they shot the episode, and he would point out that the Tranya that Baylock would serve Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Bailey was actually pink grapefruit juice. The episode opens on Stardate 1512.2 with the USS Enterprise mapping star charts. Mr. Spock has the bridge as Captain Kirk is in sickbay getting his quarterly physical checkup from Dr. McCoy. Mr. Sulu would inform him that there was an incoming object ahead. The object appears to be cube-like and is appearing to be blocking the way of the Enterprise. Captain Kirk is called to the bridge. Curiously, Dr. McCoy sees the red alert signal but elects not to inform the captain. Only in getting dressed does Captain Kirk realize the alert and signals the bridge. He is informed that there is an object that is blocking their path and appears to be unwilling to let the Enterprise by. Upon entering the bridge, Captain Kirk is informed by Mr. Spock that the object is solid, but its composition is unknown. Lieutenant Uhura would say despite opening channels, there was no signal from the object. Lieutenant Bailey would inform the captain that the object is 1,593 meters away and holding. Mr. Sulu would say that the object's weight was 11,000 metric tons, while Mr. Scott was unable to understand what could make a solid cube sense them coming and move. The star maps would reveal no inhabitable planets nearby, and after a standoff of 18 hours, Captain Kirk would call for a briefing. Mr. Spock would suggest that it could be a buoy of some kind, or perhaps flypaper, a sort of a trap. Captain Kirk would say that it was time for action, and informed Mr. Bailey to plot a spiral course away from it in an attempt to pull away. But despite the direction and speed of the Enterprise, the object would continue to block their path. The radiation being emitted from the object would also steadily increase. Once it was at tolerance level, Captain Kirk would order the phasers to fire on it. The Enterprise would destroy the object, returning the radiation levels back to normal. Captain Kirk would elect to move ahead, knowing that they would eventually meet the creator of the cube. The captain would then order a series of attack and evasion efficiency drills, noting that Mr. Bailey was sluggish and lagging, unlocking phasers when ordered. Dr. McCoy would inform the captain that the crew had been stressed and that might be a bad time, and that he may have promoted Lieutenant Bailey too quickly. Mr. Spock would later report that the efficiency ratings of the drills would be 94%, and Captain Kirk would tell him, "Let's try for 100, Mr. Spock." Later, at the beginning of the drills, Mr. Sulu would cut in and sound red alert, all hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Mr. Spock would inform the captain that they have made contact with another object of some kind. On the bridge, Mr. Spock would inform the captain that the object was much bigger. Matter of fact, the mass scale was off the charts. It was completely off the scale. Mr. Bailey would add that it was 5,000 meters away, and already it filled the screen. Captain Kirk would order hailing frequencies open and inform the object that they were the United Earth Ship Enterprise, and said that, "We convey greetings and await your reply." Mr. Bailey would pick up a message being transmitted through his navigational beam. Lieutenant Uhura would put the signal on speakers. There was a deep voice identifying itself as Baylock, commander of the flagship Thesaurus, the First Federation. The voice would go on to say that the Enterprise was a vessel from a primitive and savage civilization after having ignored the warning buoy and then having destroyed it, suggesting that their mission was not one of peace. The voice goes on to say that the disposition of the vessel is being considered, as well as the life aboard. Captain Kirk would respond saying that the nature of the buoy was unknown to them and that their vessel was blocked and prevented to go. That is when the entire ship was subject to a probing scan, and the voice would return saying no further communication with the vessel would be accepted, and at the slightest possible sign of aggression, the ship would be immediately destroyed. The Enterprise would attempt to launch a recorder marker, warning future ships, but that too would be immediately destroyed upon launch. The alien voice would then inform the Enterprise bridge that their recording marker had been destroyed and that their vessel must also be destroyed. The voice would state acknowledgement of deities in their culture and would grant 10 Earth time periods known as minutes in preparation of their destruction. Dr. McCoy and Mr. Scott would come onto the bridge, and Dr. McCoy would inform the captain that Balok's message was heard throughout the ship. The captain would address the crew, informing them that they are facing the unknown and suggest any life form capable of space travel and intelligence is capable of understanding our motives. Captain Kirk would say that they do not wish to trespass in a communication with Balok and that the Enterprise would go back the way they came. It would be ignored, and they realized that the power to the weapons and the engines had been cut. Mr. Spock would establish a visual signal so the crew could see Balok. Balok said that they were wasting time and they had 8 minutes left. Mr. Bailey would then have a meltdown, showing fear and frustration. Captain Kirk would have no choice but to relieve him of duty. Captain Kirk would attempt to explain to Balok that the destruction of the buoy was in self-preservation and that it emitted a harmful radiation to our species. Balok would respond by saying that there were 7 minutes left. Later on, with only 4 minutes left, Mr. Spock would suggest that when you are beaten at chess and cannot make any more moves, it is called checkmate. Later on, it would be Captain Kirk that would say, "Not chess, Mr. Spock, poker." He would inform Balok that the Earth vessels carried a substance called Corbomite, and that, out of respect for other life forms, they warned the attacking forces. He'd go on to say that any destructive force touching our vessel will be met with equal force. He said that any attack on this vessel will meet the equal force destroying the attacker. And he would say that death has little meaning to us, and if it has none to you, attack us now. We grow annoyed at your foolishness. Eventually, as time runs out and no attack coming, Mr. Spock would say, "Interesting game, this poker." And Captain Kirk would say it does have its advantages over chess. With 36 seconds left, Mr. Bailey would return to the bridge and ask permission to return to his post, and Captain Kirk would grant it. Balok would demand proof of a Corbomite device, and Captain Kirk would deny it. A small ship would then emerge from the thesaurus. And Balok would inform the Enterprise that they were in a tractor beam and would be taken to a nearby planet capable of supporting their life. And he would go on to say that the ship would be destroyed, and any attempt to escape or destruction of the small ship would result in the immediate destruction of the Enterprise. Balok would allow the Enterprise to have power restored for life support systems. Captain Kirk would then order the ship to attempt to shear off and alter course by placing more strain on the ship towing them. The Enterprise would eventually break free and shear off. The small ship towing the Enterprise would overtax its engines, become overheated, and then motionless. Lieutenant Uhura would pick up a distress signal from the small ship in an attempt to contact the Thesaurus. She said the signal was very weak and that she doubted the mothership had even heard it. Captain Kirk would order them to beam over to the ship and attempt to help, setting course for the small disabled ship. Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Bailey would transport the Balok's ship. Once there, they would see Balok sitting in a chair. Kirk would draw his phaser, and then he would realize that it was a dummy or a puppet. That is when they heard a voice that was much less intimidating, stating that he was Balok and welcomed them to his ship. He knew Captain Kirk and the landing party by name. He would invite them to sit and would serve them a drink called Tranya, Captain Kirk inquires about the puppet, and Balok laughed and said it was his alter ego. In your culture, he is the Mr. Hyde to my Dr. Jekyll. He goes on to say that you must admit he is effective. You never would have been frightened by me, and I find my distress signal rather clever. Balok goes on to say that it was a test to find out the real intentions of the Enterprise. He also states that he had no crew. He alone runs the entire complex and the Visorius from his ship. He says that he did miss company of others, and even an alien companion would be welcome. He suggests one of Captain Kirk's men staying with him. Captain Kirk would agree to that and state that he'd get a better officer in return after mutual exchange of information. He would glance in Mr. Bailey's direction and say, "Mr. Bailey, do you know where we could find a volunteer?" And Mr. Bailey would respond, "I would like to volunteer, sir." And the episode would end with Balok, before bringing back the Visorius, showing Dr. McCoy, Captain Kirk, and Mr. Bailey his ship.